This is the Sports Bash Warm-Up with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN. Now, live inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, here's Josh Hennig.
Josh Hennig here. And I'm at a point where I just don't know what on earth is going on anymore. Sometimes in sports. 97.3 ESPN, 609-403-0973 is the text board. I've now seen not one, not two, but three different people this week say the Sixers should be one of the favorites going down to the Disney World bubble when the NBA resumes their season. So we're going to get a little clarity about it. Am I just losing my mind or am I just in denial? We'll ask Michael Kaskey-Blomain, CBS Sports NBA and Sixers Insider coming up at 1:25 here on the warm-up on 97.3 ESPN. There's a lot going on. And this week, one of the things that's been going on totally came out of left field for me. And that is, for those of you who are among the many subscribers to our 97.3 ESPN YouTube channel, we thank all of you who subscribe and re-listen or listen to interviews that we do throughout the weeks here on 97.3 ESPN. So the Sports Bash put up a poll. And Mike Gill and Hunter Brody decided they would just put up the poll and kind of just see what happens, right? Because sometimes you never know what the results of a poll are going to be. But we're over a day into this poll now. And this poll about football is blowing my mind. And either people are incredible in denial or they're all a bunch of two-faced. Because we are over 500 votes on this poll. Again, it's on the YouTube community page for 97.3 ESPN's YouTube. Which first-round wide receiver will make a bigger impact in 2020? And there's multiple options here. So you have the Eagles' Jalen Reagor, the Cowboys' CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy drafted to the Broncos, Henry Ruggs on the Raiders, or Justin Jefferson on the Vikings. Overwhelmingly, the voters chose one name. Overwhelmingly, they went in one direction. 74%. Huge margin. On a five-way poll. A poll that I expected to be much closer when it was first posted. And I think Mike Gill and Hunter Brody are also shocked by this. 74% voted for Jalen Reagor of the Eagles. I'm sorry, wasn't it just 2 months ago that I was having to convince people that Jalen Reagor was a good pick? Wasn't it just 2 months ago that people were crying about not drafting Justin Jefferson, or how the Cowboys got CeeDee Lamb, or how the Eagles should have traded up to get Henry Ruggs? Wasn't it just 2 months ago that everyone was losing their minds? So it took you 2 months and now people love Jalen Reagor? Or is it that all the people who were complaining about the Jalen Reagor pick have been converted? I'm having trouble accepting that. I mean, maybe it's possible that the 520 votes so far on this poll on the 97.3 ESPN YouTube community page, a poll that got 22 likes, by the way, 0 dislikes, that they're all saying Jalen Reagor with the votes. And the comments don't even add up because there's 8 comments, but the majority of the comments are conflicting with the poll. For example, the one guy says a bunch of Eagle fans just voted. Another person says if Ruggs stays healthy. Another voter says, to be honest, I feel like Denzel Mims of the Jets will be the biggest impact. Guy's not even on the poll. Wasn't even a first-round pick. The question of the poll was first-round picks. Obviously, that dude didn't read the poll. Another text says, I love to say Reagor, but I just don't think he's going to get on the field enough. So I got to go with Ruggs. So you have a chunk of these comments that are not in support of Reagor, but yet 74% went Reagor. So please tell me on the text board, 609-403-0973. First of all, which first-round wide receiver do you think will have the biggest impact between Henry Ruggs, Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Reagor, and Justin Jefferson? Those are 5 options. 5 wide receivers were picked in the first round among the top 20-some picks. But my second question is, why? Don't just give me a name and leave it there. I might make fun of you. Because I really want to have this conversation. Because I went off and did a little research. I was talking with Mike Gill before the show today, and he brought up about the poll results and how they're still intensely in one direction. 74% is a lot. So I decided to do a little research on all 5 receivers. Now, I will tell you that I liked the Reagor pick when it came down. I appreciated the Reagor pick when it came down for a couple reasons, one of them being of how explosive an athlete he is, and number 2, if the Eagles' goal was to get speed on the field, then Reagor fills that need nicely. And as we know, Reagor was 10 pounds heavier at the combine than his pro day. And in his pro day, he ran a faster 40 time than his pro day. And most experts and analysts say that he runs faster on the football field than in the 40 time. So take it or leave that for whatever that's worth. But I decided, all right, let's do a little research on all of these guys. You're talking about the 5 receivers who were drafted in the first round. And you can get involved in the conversation at 609-403-0973. So of the 5 receivers, the guy that had the most yards per catch in college was CeeDee Lamb, with 21.4. The guy with the fewest yards per catch was Justin Jefferson at 13.9. So we're talking about almost an 8-yard difference from Lamb to Jefferson. Now, if you look at, for example, Ruggs and Reagor, that's a 4-yard difference. Not crazy, but it definitely is significant. By the way, Jerry Jeudy's at 15.1. He's only got about a yard more per catch. Now, we also got to understand the offenses they were in. Jalen Reagor played for the worst offense in the Big 12, and for a quarterback who shouldn't even be starting any games in college football. Justin Jefferson played for the most high-powered offense in college football with the Heisman Trophy winner. CeeDee Lamb played in a high-powered offense with Jalen Hurts. And then Jeudy and Ruggs played at Alabama in another high-powered offense. Now, Reagor only had 5 touchdown catches, Justin Jefferson at 18. But then again, Justin Jefferson played the most high-powered offense in college football. Reagor played arguably the worst offense in college football. Ruggs, productive year, not as many catches as Jeudy. CeeDee Lamb, not as many catches as Jefferson, 62. Versus 111 for Justin Jefferson. He was a sticks mover at times in the LSU offense. So who really had the better college season last year? If you look at the difference between Reagor and Jefferson, the stats tell you that Jefferson did. But how much credit do we really give Jefferson for playing in a high-powered offense when Reagor played in an abysmal offense? According to Pro Football Focus, only about 37% of the passes thrown to Reagor were even accurate last year. And Jefferson had one of the most accurate quarterbacks in college football history in Joe Burrow. Or do we just throw out all the stats and say whatever happened in college doesn't matter? I'm not going to go as far as the further point and say that the stats in college don't matter. I think it's a measurement of understanding what a player can and can't do. An understanding of okay, there is a level of ability that these guys can go out there and perform. But of the 5 first-round wide receivers of Henry Ruggs, Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Reagor, and Justin Jefferson, most people believed coming into the draft the 3 best receivers were Ruggs, Jeudy, and Lamb. And then that's not even a particular order. It just depended on your preference. After that, there was arguments about who the next 3 were. Brandon Ayuk's name came up in those conversations. Denzel Mims' name came up. Reagor's name came up. Jefferson's name came up. To me, to properly answer this question of which first-round receiver will make the biggest impact in 2020, taking away all bias, taking away all personal, subjective opinion, you have to be honest and look at this poll and say there's one problem with this poll. If you were being objective, the way to read this poll, to understand who will have the biggest impact, is to rephrase it this way. Which first-round wide receiver drafted in the 2020 NFL Draft should you pick for your fantasy football team? That's how you answer this question properly. And if 74% of the people are really going to draft Jalen Reagor over the other 4 receivers for their fantasy football team, I would love to know why. And it's not because I think Reagor is going to have a bad year, or I think Reagor is going to be a bust, or I don't think he's going to play well. But you do realize that the Eagles' offense scored 24.1 points per game in an offense with horrible receivers by the end of the year. Basically, 3 tight ends doing most of the catches. Miles Sanders being one of the best receivers on the team. You compare that to an offense like the Vikings that scored 25.4 points per game, or the Cowboys that scored 27.1 points per game. Just by precedent, just by looking back on what those 2 offenses did before they drafted those receivers tells you we can already expect them to have a high output of offense in 2020. Now, the Vikings trade away Stephon Diggs. He was their leader in targets last year. So those 94 targets got to go somewhere. And I would feel like it's safe to assume that if Adam Thielen is healthy this year, that a good chunk of those targets go to him. So you could argue that Jefferson could have the biggest year because he's going to a team to fill the biggest void. CeeDee Lamb, on the flip side, is going to a team where Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup both had over 100 targets each, and both of them are still on the team. Now, Jason Witten's gone. That's 83 targets. But do we really think that CeeDee Lamb is going to get 83 targets in his rookie year? Now, Jeudy and Ruggs, it's subjective. They're both going to poor offenses last year. It's hard to gauge. But if you're asking me who's going to have the bigger impact, I think the way to answer that question is who's going to have the bigger fantasy impact. And if you're being honest about fantasy football, and you take away the team's names and all that other stuff, you realize that Jefferson is probably going to get the most targets. CeeDee Lamb is probably going to get the least targets. And Reagor has to have a big role because he's going to a team where Alshon Jeffrey had 73 targets, Nelson Aguilar had 69 targets, and we know there's no more Aguilar, and we know that Jeffrey is going to play for at least the first several weeks of the season. So Reagor is going to get a big chunk of targets. Justin Jefferson is going to get a big chunk of targets. CeeDee Lamb, not so much. So why did Justin Jefferson get 4% and Reagor get 74%? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the poll was a bunch of people who are hoping that Reagor is the best receiver in this class, which he can still be. The problem is that when this year comes around and Justin Jefferson is on the all-rookie team because he's on a team that's feeding him catches, and he's on a team that already has some high-powered weapons on his offense, and Reagor doesn't get as many targets because he's playing on an offense with Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, Deshaun Jackson, and Miles Sanders. People are going to automatically only go by the stats and say, should have drafted Jefferson. Let me tell you something about football. Football is a team sport. And I know that we all love to highlight guys' stats and we all play fantasy football, and I'm all for that. But at some point, we have to admit that this whole let's jump the judgment on a guy after a rookie season is the most ridiculous thing in the world. Because we've seen both sides of this coin in the NFL. Not every guy who has a great rookie year has a great career. And not every guy who has a bad rookie year has a bad career. But yet we treat these guys like if they don't play well in week 7 of the NFL season, their rookie year, they're going to be bums. I ask and implore everyone to let this play out because the early returns may not be 100% in Jalen Reagor's favor. And it's not because he's going to be a bust. It's not because he's a bad player. It's not because he can't play football. And it's not because the Eagles shouldn't have drafted him. It's because he's not in an offense that's going to be dependent on him for all of their success. Justin Jefferson is walking into an offense that has a massive void to be filled of 94 targets from last year. You look at the Eagles, Reagor doesn't have as huge of a role to fill. He's not walking in and needing to fill the shoes of the top 2 target guys from a team the previous year. Furthermore, he's going to a team that may actually ask him to not always catch the ball. There are things like end arounds. There are situations where he may be returning punts and kicks, and they may need him to be focused sometimes on those aspects of the field, more so than being the best rookie receiver in the NFL. And Reagor showed at TCU that he is more than capable of being a team-first guy and not a me-first guy. And that's one of the elements for why those 5 receivers were drafted in the first round. Do they all have talent? Yes. But they're all team-first guys. Justin Jefferson wouldn't get mad if Thaddeus Moss scored a touchdown. Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs were not running around jealous of each other or backstabbing each other. CeeDee Lamb was the focus of an offense that didn't always need him to be the primary weapon on some weeks. Again, CeeDee Lamb had 62 catches last year. That's less than Jerry Jeudy. That's less than Justin Jefferson. Now, it's more than Ruggs and Reagor, but it's still less than 2 of the other receivers. So do we think CeeDee Lamb is going to be a lesser receiver because he only had 62 catches last year? No. We think CeeDee Lamb is probably going to have the least impact of the 5 receivers on this list, in my opinion, because he's playing for a team that drafted him as a luxury and not a need. That team is Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and Ezekiel Elliott. They don't need CeeDee Lamb. They wanted CeeDee Lamb. And when you look at Ruggs and Jeudy, they're both going to teams that, frankly, were pretty poor offensively last year. Both the Raiders and the Broncos scored less points per game than the Eagles. The Eagles last year scored 24.1 points per game. And half the year, they had Deontay Burnett and Robert Davis and Greg Lewis and Josh Perkins as major targets in the offense. And they still scored more than the Broncos and the Raiders. And when you look at the Broncos receiving core, Cortland Sutton, Noah Fant, the tight end, Deshaun Hamilton, and then the two running backs, Royce Freeman and Phillip Lindsay, we know the running back situation is going to be different because they brought in Melvin Gordon. So if Gordon is going to be a primary back, quote unquote, in the Broncos offense, that changes their target situation. The assumption is that it's going to be Judy and Sutton on the outside, but there's no guarantee that that is going to work out like that. What if they put Judy in the slot? What if he is a better slot receiver in the NFL than an outside receiver? How does that change his targets? How does that change his production? Drew Lock only played half the year last year. How much better will he be in 2020? How much better can the offense be in 2020? Is the offensive line going to hold up after some of the changes they made in the offseason? There's a lot of questions with the Broncos. Look at the Raiders moving to a new city. How does that affect the team? Your number 2 guy in targets last year was your slot receiver, Hunter Renfrow. Your quote unquote number 1 wide receiver, Tyrell Williams, was third in targets on the team. And you had 2 underwhelming backs who combined for 84 targets last year, that being Jalen Reagor and DeAndre Washington. So how good can Ruggs really be in 2020? Eagle fans, I implore you, don't be afraid to admit that in their rookie year, Jalen Reagor might not be the best receiver statistically, because he still may have the better career. Once Kirk Cousins is no longer in Minnesota, who's going to be the quarterback? That will definitely affect Justin Jefferson's future. You look at guys like Ruggs and Judy. There's no guarantees of their quarterback futures. We know John Gruden falls in and out of love with quarterbacks all the time, and Drew Lock, there's no guarantee he's going to be an elite receiver. There's always drama in Dallas. We don't know how that will affect CeeDee Lamb yet. You could argue that Reagor is going to be the most stable of all 4 of those teams in terms of quarterback situation, in terms of offensive coordinator, head coach, play caller, organizational stability. There are fewer questions about the Eagles' future than the other teams on this list. So I'm imploring you. It's okay if Reagor doesn't have the biggest impact in 2020, because he may have the best career of all of them. 609-403-0973 is text board to get on the conversation. Coming up next, we'll transition over to the Sixers. People are saying the Sixers should be one of the favorites in Orlando when the NBA returns. Should they really be? CBS Sports NBA insider Michael Kaskey-Blomain joins me next here on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app.
There are a couple of teams that I want you guys to bullseye. If the NBA season returns, watch out for the Portland Trail Blazers and the Philadelphia 76ers. This is going to be an unorthodox finish, and you're going to see some strange things happen with some lower-seeded teams like the Knicks were able to do in the late 90s when they made it to the finals during the strike-shortened season. Those are 2 squads that could get healthy and upset some higher seeds and make some noise.
So I've heard Jalen Rose, I've heard Charles Barkley, I read Chris Mannix, and I've heard others on multiple platforms all over television bring up the Sixers as a potential dark seed, under the radar favorite, whatever terminology you want to use. Are they really, though? How much can we really take from a Sixers team that has been among the most inconsistent in the NBA this year? Joining us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, friend of 97.3 ESPN, Michael Kaskey-Blomain, CBS Sports NBA writer and Sixers insider, joins us now. Mike, how you doing today?
Doing well, Josh. Thanks for having me on.
I'm glad to have you on because, and listen, I'm not trying to be the negative guy. I'm not trying to be the person who sits there and says, this is impossible. But I feel like I'm hearing it a little bit too much now of people saying the Sixers should be a favorite. The Sixers should be a dark horse. Is it just a trendy pick that people are latching onto, or is there some legitimacy to the idea that the Sixers can be one of the favorites when the NBA resumes next month?
I definitely think there's some legitimacy to it, Josh, because it's a similar situation to heading into the season where obviously, a lot of people were saying that the Sixers could be the team to come out in the East and, get to the finals, potentially even win the championship. And now, obviously they had an inconsistent season up to that point, but, a lot of the rationale for that at the time was the talent that they had on the team. And that talent is still there. And they showed, despite being inconsistent over the course of the regular season before it was suspended, they did show how high their ceiling could be in certain situations with some of the wins they had, over, the league's better teams, the Bucks, the Lakers, the Clippers, teams like that. So, they showed how good they can be, and they still have, the same talented roster that they had on paper coming into the season when people thought that they, had a chance to get to the finals. So, it's just a matter of if they're able to finally gain the consistency and put everything together. But, in terms of they certainly have the talent to, make a deep playoff run. And they've showed that when they're all on the same page and clicking that they can beat, pretty much any team in the league. So now it's just going to be a matter of kind of getting everything together on the same page at the same time.
Now, you mentioned getting on the same page at the same time. How do they do that in 8 games, though? Doesn't it feel like, that's almost like it's almost like going and playing at the casino and rolling a dice and hoping you don't get snake eyes. Like, isn't there a part of this that feels like no matter what team we're talking about, that you're off for this many months, you have training camp, you have 8 games. Doesn't it feel like there's a little bit of you're hoping for the best with some of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's fair to say, like you said, Josh, about every team. You don't know exactly what to expect. This is an unprecedented situation in the league. These players have never had a layoff like this where it's not, it's not like an off season where you can still get in pickup runs and work out and shoot around at the team facilities. They've been, away from the game and away from the court and away from actual, game competition for so many months that it's pretty much impossible to predict how things are going to shake out once, they get to Orlando. But I think the Sixers is just such an interesting case because they had by far the biggest disparity in, their home away splits on the season in terms of how good they were at home and how, how much they struggled on the road. So I think, there's a level of intrigue with every team in terms of how they're going to handle the situation. I think the Sixers are, especially intriguing, obviously here locally, but also just on a national level because they were such a Jekyll and Hyde team where they were at their best, looked like they really could win a championship and contend with any team in the league. But at their worst, they looked like they were, potentially a first round exit. So, for the Sixers, I think the hope is that with the focus, with playoffs here, the focus will come. I think a lot of the issues that they had on the road were, maybe they overlooked teams or didn't take them seriously enough or things like that. And the hope obviously is once the playoffs are here and that focus comes and that every game is important and you're playing for a championship, that kind of brings guys together. And just also the familiarity aspect of it. It was a roster that the Sixers had this year that was new and was learning with each other. There was a lot of injury issues throughout the season that prevented them from, getting the full on-court opportunity to gel with each other. So I think the hope is that, with Ben back and healthy and Joel back and healthy and all the other pieces healthy, that, ultimately they'll finally be able to get the time together and start to gel. It's obviously a lot of ifs, but, there is certainly enough talent on the team to make some noise for sure.
Which of the Sixers' issues that we've encountered over the last several months concerns you the most when the team comes back?
Oh, that's a great question, Josh. It's tough because there's obviously, the team was dealing with several different issues at the time. I think the main thing is probably really the same issue that they've been dealing with that's been, maybe holding them back from a championship for the past couple of seasons in terms of their offense, their half-court offense once it comes down to crunch time. If a team is, in a series where a team is scouting a player like Ben Simmons and they're able to kind of take away his strength and force him into uncomfortable situations. At that point, over the past couple of years, the Sixers have struggled, to persevere and overcome. And I think this year, the idea was that they would have other guys. They signed Tobias Harris. They signed a veteran and Al Horford, guys that could step up in these playoff situations in case Joel was being double teamed or Ben was not being taken out of his comfort zone, something like that. So, until we see that these other players can step up, obviously they added a couple other guys before the season was suspended at the trade deadline, and Alec Burks and Glenn Robinson, and, Furkan Korkmaz took a big step forward this season. So they have a lot of other perimeter pieces, but I think the question is still going to be, once it gets down to it, is there enough talent outside of, the main couple guys there that you can really count on to help carry the team over the edge?
Michael Kaskey-Blomain here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure you're following him on Twitter at @TheRealMikeKB for your Sixers and NBA news. Now, the other question I have with the Sixers is Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. Obviously, if these two guys don't play well, the team goes nowhere. We all know that. We all understand that. But there's been some reports about questions about Ben Simmons, how healthy he is, how healthy he isn't. He's putting out those pictures of him lifting. He looks swole as all heck. Embiid says he's in great shape. He's been working out 6 days a week. But realistically, what can we expect from those two when they come back? Because obviously, everyone's in the same boat. Everyone hasn't played for months. Anybody who is injured, they haven't really been working with a training staff at the facility for the last 2 months. So how far along is Ben Simmons in his health? And Joel Embiid, how good a shape can he be in, considering that for months guys haven't been able to have access to a basketball court even?
Yeah, that's a great question, Josh. But I think you could expect, a lot from both of these players, just given the fact that, they've been preparing to come back. And they got, the Sixers in a way got kind of lucky in terms of the schedule and the delay, meaning that if the postseason had occurred when it was, usually scheduled to in April, there's a very good chance that, Ben Simmons wouldn't have been available for the team for probably the entirety of the postseason. But at this point, he's been rehabbing for months and getting back into shape. I'm sure none of them are quite in game shape right at this point, as is, the case for all the players throughout the league, which is, a big reason that they wanted to have those 8 regular season games before the postseason started in Orlando. But in terms of, those two guys, Ben and Joel specifically, I think that you should be able to expect them to be what we've come to expect them to be. I think Ben will be ready to go. I don't think, obviously, if there's still the people out there waiting to see him come out and start gunning from the perimeter, I certainly don't think that's going to be the case. Especially given the fact that his ability to, practice his shot during this time has probably been limited due to his access to courts and gyms and things like that. But I think physically he'll be in the game shape that we've come to expect from him, athletically and physically. And the same with Joel. I think it'll probably take him a little while to get his feet under him. But, as far as he said he's been working out 6 times a week, getting prepared. So, I haven't seen him fit personally, so I'll take him at his word for that for now. I think he's focused on the fact that, the team for a while, they weren't sure if the season would be ended. And I think they're happy that, if the season had ended, it would have been, kind of a disappointment for the Sixers. They're 6th in the East. They didn't really get it to make the noise that a lot of people thought they would. So now with the season coming back, I think these guys, those two specifically, Ben and Joel, being the leaders of the team that have gone through the past couple of playoff battles, I think they realize that there's an opportunity here to make this season, a special one still, despite the inconsistency that they showed during the regular season. And, me, the impression that I've gotten through, the people that I've talked to and the things that I've seen is that they're both ready to, kind of try to make the most of the opportunity in Orlando.
Now, speaking of Orlando, there's been a lot of news coming out about the bubble environment, what the players can and can't do, how they're going to be testing guys very, very often. They're going to be checking for symptoms. Pretty much anybody who goes in this bubble is going to be checked and tested, and they're going to cross their T's and dot their I's. Mike, from everything that you have gathered about what is going to happen and what people around the league are saying, do you think it's enough? Do you think that the environment as constructed is enough? That's
tough, Josh, because, there's no perfect scenario, obviously. I think there's definitely holes in their plan. Like, it's not a foolproof, completely sealed plan. I do think there's holes, but at the same time, I think that for such a complex situation in terms of, orchestrating and logistically getting all this together, I do think it's a pretty sound plan. I mean, at the end of the day, we can be realistic about it. If money wasn't a factor in this decision, the league probably would not be, going back to Orlando this season, probably would have been scrapped. But at the end of the day, the NBA is still a business, and they have, not only this season to consider, but obviously the future of the league moving forward. It would be a huge loss for them, obviously, in terms of moving forward in the CBA and the basketball-related income if they didn't finish this season. So, given the fact that that's the prime motivator, I do think that the plan laid out is, it's pretty solid. It's about as good as you can get, given all the things. But I do think there's still, room where there is, potential for, obviously, the players to potentially get exposed to the COVID or other things like that. So, it could be better, but I think they've done a pretty good job.
Now, I'm only extrapolating a little bit from what you said, so I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to further a point that you made there. So one of the things that's been brought up is about the financial situation and about how they need the play for a couple of reasons. One of them being that the players could lose millions of dollars, the owners could lose billions of dollars, but also because of the fact that the owners have the opportunity, if they don't play, to rip up the CBA and make them renegotiate. We know that the players have precipitously lost percentage of revenue in the last 3 negotiating sessions. So is that even more important that the players say, listen, this might not be ideal, but we need to keep a good relationship with the owners so when the next round of CBA negotiations comes along, we don't lose more ground?
100%, Josh. Absolutely. I absolutely think that's a big part of the conversation on the players and a big part of the reason, again, why they're going back. There's obviously concerns among the players for, various reasons going back, whether it's, being away from family, whether it's about potential exposure and the health to the virus, whether it's about, disrupting the social justice reform going on throughout the country. There's a lot of concerns between these players. And again, in an ideal world, I think a lot of them would be against it. But at the end of the day, they also understand, in their own, in their own aspects in terms of businessmen and controlling their own future, that, doing so and not continuing the season would hurt them tremendously moving forward for years to come in terms of their leverage and in terms of the basketball related income, which is basically what the players' salaries are dished out of year by year. That the further that gets chopped down, the less money there is to go around for all the players. And I think that's today's players, especially in the NBA, they're more well versed, in the business side of the sport than ever before. The guys they have in their corners, their managers and business partners and everything like that. They're hyper aware of how their actions and decisions affect their bottom line, basically. And I think that they realize that in this situation. And again, that's a huge factor in the reason that, this plan in Orlando is going through.
Mike, you wrote over at CBSSports.com. You gave 5 upcoming free agents that could boost their stock in Orlando. And one of them is a Sixer, Alec Burks. He is an unrestricted free agent. We know he had big numbers with Golden State before coming to Philadelphia. What kind of impact can he have for the Sixers? Because we know that, listen, before everything got shut down, it's not like the Sixers had a ton of games with him and Glenn Robinson III out there on the court. So how much time do you think he actually can get when the Sixers return to action?
That's a great question, Josh. And a lot of that obviously falls to Brett Brown. I do think some of the issues, I guess, for lack of a better word, that Burks had in integrating into the Sixers when he first came was due to a little bit of, confusion or obscurity in terms of what his exact role was, given the fact that, the Sixers are pretty deep on the wing at this point now after, they added Burks and Glenn Robinson, who are basically competing for playing time against each other. And then you already had Korkmaz on the roster. You already had Matisse Thybulle on the roster, who developed into a guy that, certainly deserved minutes. So I think there was, some of it will be up to Brett Brown. But for Burks, he's a guy that, was, I think, definitely, I don't know if disappointed is the right word, but was maybe not super happy to come into Philly because in Golden State, he knew he had the opportunity to get ample playing time this season. And like you said there, he was putting up, some serious numbers, over 16 points a game, playing almost 30 minutes. And those numbers dipped dramatically in Philadelphia. just given the fact, you're playing with star players that are taking more of the, the percentage of the offense and the playing time is down. But if he gets the opportunity and is able to take advantage of it in terms of knocking down shots and providing the team with an outlet and another offensive option off of Ben and Embiid, which is what he was brought here to do. He's the type of guy, he's still only 28 years old. He has really good size at 6'6" for a perimeter player. He's a capable defender. He's, not a lockdown guy, but he's also not a swinging door. So, with that, he's the type of guy that could stand to cash in this summer. And I think if he can show that, no one's going to sign him, obviously, to be a first or second option. But if he can show that he can be a solid fit around guys that are already, developed in championship caliber, and that he can spot up and make shots and be a 3-and-D type guy, that's perfect for the league today. And he can end up locking down a multi-year deal somewhere.
He is Michael Kaskey-Blomain. Give him a follow on Twitter at @TheRealMikeKB and check out his article about the 5 upcoming free agents that could boost their stock in Orlando. And as all guests, Mike appeared here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Mike, appreciate the time and take care of yourself.
Yeah, Josh, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Josh Hennig here on the warm-up on 97.3 ESPN. We'll check out the text board and we'll wrap up the hour here next on the warm-up on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Sea Isle City. Welcome back into the warm-up. Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. We'll get to the text in just a bit at 609-403-0973. Text board open, 609-403-0973. We open the show talking about the poll that's up on the 97.3 ESPN community page. On YouTube, we have put up the poll. Which first-round wide receiver will make the biggest impact in 2020? Irrationally and overwhelmingly, 74% say Jalen Reagor. Texter chimes in and says the guy will have the biggest impact is Justin Jefferson. The texter says he will start week 1. He'll be the number 2 option in their offense. Cousins isn't airing it down the field. A lot of possession and possibly a lot of touchdowns in Jefferson's future. Maybe not the most talented of the receivers, but he is a very good position in Minnesota. The texter also gives a projection for what he thinks Jefferson will do in 2020. 95 catches for 800 yards and 8 touchdowns. I think you're a little high on the catches, texter, but I think the 800 yards and 8 touchdowns is definitely reasonable. And I would agree with that. Look, I think that, and this is not a knock on Jalen Reagor, but I think that Justin Jefferson is going to be asked to be a primary receiver in the Vikings offense. And I think in the Eagles offense, whether you like it or not, Zach Ertz is the number 1 option. And we assume that Deshaun Jackson, if he's healthy, is going to have a major role in the offense. We know that Miles Sanders was among the best in the league in total yards last year. He was 3rd on the team in receiving yards last year, so we know that he can be a threat out of the backfield. I just don't think Reagor is going to put up the gaudy numbers that Justin Jefferson will, because Jefferson will be a primary target in the offense, and Reagor is probably, the 3rd or 4th option in the Eagles offense. Doesn't mean he's not going to get a lot of playing time, not going to get a lot of opportunity, but you think about it, the Vikings lost their number 1 receiver from last year. The Eagles lost Nelson Aguilar. There's a huge difference between Aguilar and Diggs. So, and again, you look at the other receivers, I think Judy and Ruggs are going to be asked to have significant roles in their offenses, but we don't know what those offenses will look like because of how poor they were last year. We have no idea what the Raiders are going to do in 2020. John Gruden falls in and out of love with quarterbacks and players as often as people should be washing their hands. It's absolutely ridiculous. John Gruden can't make up his mind. Meanwhile, in Denver, Drew Lock is the quarterback of the future. But does he hit a sophomore slump? Does he play as well as he could next year or as he should? There's a lot of variables there. There's a lot of questions that go along with that. So, again, question on the 97.3 ESPN YouTube community page. Which first-round wide receiver will make the biggest impact in 2020? I tend to agree with the texter. It's probably going to be Justin Jefferson. But I will put this out there, as I said earlier, and I'll say it again and again and again until I'm blue in the face. Do not judge Jalen Reagor's value as a first-round pick just on his rookie season. He can still have a great career and not be the best rookie receiver next year. They're not one and the same. Just because you have a great rookie year, there's no guarantee you're going to have a great career. It's not one and the same. There's been many instances where guys might take a year or two to really come into their own, be all they can be. Most players hit their peak in years 4 through 7 in the NFL, if they get to those years 4 through 7. And I think Reagor will, and I have a lot of confidence in him to get there for the Eagles. Now, the other receivers, like I said, again, the Raiders and the Broncos, I don't know what they're going to look like. And I wouldn't be surprised if CeeDee Lamb doesn't have a huge year, because in the Cowboys offense, their two top targets from last year, Gallup and Cooper, are both still there. The CeeDee Lamb draft pick was a luxury pick. It was a pick where the Cowboys were saying, look what we can get away with, more so than anything else. And not that CeeDee Lamb won't have a huge career, but he's going to an offense that doesn't need him. The Vikings need Jefferson. The Eagles also need Reagor. Just don't get all down on him because he doesn't have 10 touchdowns, 100 receiving yards, and 1,100 receiving yards. Because apparently if you're a first-round pick, you have to have those stats, right? I'll catch you all tomorrow for Sports Bash Saturday at 12, following Billy Schwein in the locker room here on 97.3 ESPN.